Hey everyone, I'm Nightmare Patrol. I know many of you enjoy these stories as part of your nighttime routine, so before you turn off the lights, I'd love for you to drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's chilling tale. There was a notebook that survived the last fire I was called to. I found it among the smoldering ashes. I don't know if I believe the story it tells, but I thought I should share it, just in case it's true. It says this. Mama said there'd be days like this. It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? It speaks of a caring mother trying to comfort her child in the face of the world's harsh realities. The problem is, I don't remember my mama ever saying anything like that to me. And even if she did, I don't think that in her worst nightmare she could have imagined a day like that one. The day I leaned against the inner wall of a train tunnel, soaked in sweat and dirt, staring at the tracks dripping with my friend's blood that should have been mine. My name is Joe. I don't think I was named after anyone. Mama always just called me Joe. There are a lot of things Mama always did, like beat me until I bled when I disobeyed her. Beat me until I bled if I didn't kill something for dinner. Beat me until I bled the day I told her I wanted to learn how to read. At that point, you'd think I wouldn't have much blood left to give, but you couldn't tell Mama that. She was a big woman, and I think hitting me made her feel better about herself. I grew up in a small cabin in the middle of nowhere. Mama always called it a cabin, but really it was just 4 walls and a roof, thrown together with boards and nails stolen from an old barn down the road. Mama always told me she took good care of me. Of course, she also told me the cabin was a big house and that learning was bad. I guess in a way it was for her. I couldn't have picture books or anything like that. I'll teach you everything you need to know, Mama said. That's what I call a half-truth. She taught me everything she needed me to know: how to cook, clean, chop wood, and take care of her when she was sick. Anything else was on Mama's forbidden list. So how does all this lead to a boy watching his friend get horribly torn apart by a speeding train? Stick with me for a bit. Well, get there. Mama didn't have a job. We hunted and farmed our food. Once a month, we'd drag our little fragile cart all the way to a gas station on the outskirts of Larson, 15 miles away. We'd set up by the side of the road, selling homegrown vegetables during the day. Mama never let me see or talk to any of the people. They're no good, she said, and I don't want you becoming like them. Mama had a special word for the people who lived in any town, Ergant. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but I later found out it meant people who don't see things the same way Mama does. At night, we'd go shopping in dumpsters. The next day, we'd head home with a few dollars in Mama's pocket and a cart full of treasures. Frost Creek was only 2 miles from the cabin, but to get there, you had to go through a train tunnel. Another thing that was on Mama's forbidden list. That tunnel took your daddy away from me. I'm not letting it take you too, she said. The funny thing about curiosity is that you can bottle it up, but once it's out, there's no putting it back. I found an old children's dictionary on one of our trips. You know, the kind with pictures next to the words? Well, I started looking at that book, and before you knew it, the cork was out of my bottle. I lost a lot of blood the day Mama caught me with it. We ain't the kind of folks that read, she screamed as she beat me. Nothing in that book's gonna put food on the table. But being young, dumb, and well, whatever, I hid the book from her. That was the beginning of my new life. Isn't it funny how once you cling to something new, the old just doesn't work anymore? There was a big empty cave where I hid my treasures, the few children's books I had managed to bring home, my dictionary, and a pair of dress shoes that actually fit me. I struggled to read the books, relying heavily on the pictures. My favorite was the one that told me about Halloween, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. Halloween was my favorite. The idea of getting all that candy just by wearing a costume excited me. I planned my first trick-or-treat trip very carefully. I told Mama I'd be out most of the day and night picking her favorite fruits, which I had already picked and hidden in my cave. She knew it was a long and dangerous trek to where those fruits grew. She wanted to tell me no, but I could see the hunger in her eyes. Funny how desire can overcome worry. Having gotten her blessing, I went to my cave, put on my dress shoes, torn jeans, and ripped shirt. I wrapped my dinner in a red handkerchief and tied it to the end of a stick. With my outfit complete, I headed down to the train tracks and looked at the tunnel. The sun was just beginning to set, bathing it in a ghostly red glow. The stones forming the entrance looked like giant bloody teeth just waiting to eat me. Mama always told me there was evil hiding in that tunnel. I used to think she was just trying to scare me to keep me out. But that night things were different. As I stepped into the darkness, I felt the evil inside me, like I knew I was doing something wrong, but I didn't care. I ate my dinner as I walked through the tunnel, leaving the handkerchief nearly empty. When I came out the other side, the world had transformed. Everywhere I looked, there were bright lights and people running all around. I stopped and stared at a giant yellow M. The smells coming from inside made my mouth water. One day, I'll be rich enough to eat there. Mom won't like this, I argued with myself. I dragged myself away from the site and started walking down a street that, on any other night, would have seemed bizarre beyond description. But that night, it was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. I smiled from ear to ear as ghosts holding plastic pumpkins floated nearby. Then came a trio of mini superheroes arguing about who had the most candy. Approaching the first house I saw, I knocked on the door. The porch light flicked on, and an old man suddenly opened the door. "What?" he growled. "Trick or treat," I said, holding up my scarf. The old man stared at me. "You see my porch light on?" he said. "Yes," I replied, looking up. The old man also looked up and grumbled as several other candy beggars were drawn to the light like colorful bugs. He quickly turned the light off and they wandered away. "You see that, kid?" the old man said, pointing at the other houses. "All those idiots with their porch lights on? Yeah, those are the ones you go to for your satanic and pagan candy." Not understanding the words satanic or pagan, I turned to leave, but the old man grabbed me. "But I've got a treat for you," he said with a mischievous grin, "since you were kind enough to wake me up. Wait here." The old man disappeared and reappeared fast enough to be a magician. "Here you go," he said, holding out a rotten banana. I took it, and tears welled up in my eyes. "Thank you," I said, hugging him. It was the last thing he expected. He backed away from me, grumbled, and slammed the door in my face. I peeled the banana and ate it as I walked toward the next house, making sure the porch light was on. As I started up the walkway, I finished the banana and tossed the peel into the yard. A big man in his 30s stood on the lit porch, holding a bowl of candy and frowning as I approached. "Trick or treat," I said, holding up my scarf. "You gonna throw that away?" the man asked abruptly. I looked at my scarf, seeing no reason to throw it away. "Not the scarf," the man said. "The banana." He pointed to the discarded peel I had tossed into his yard. I picked it up and looked at the big man. "Trash can," he said, pointing toward the street. I walked over and saw a can sitting next to a lamppost. I looked back at the man and pointed at the can. He nodded in approval, and I tossed the peel in, then started to leave. "Hey!" the big man called. "You don't want any candy?" I ran back up to the porch, looked at the bowl full of colorful wrappers, and grabbed a handful. "Just take 2, the man said. "It's still early, I need to save some for the other kids." I hesitated, then picked the 2 with the most interesting wrappers. "Your parents never taught you not to litter?" the man asked. Not understanding the word litter, I just nodded, pretending I did. "Where are they anyway?" the man asked. "Who?" "Your parents." "Dad's gone, and Mom's at home," I said. "Your mom let you go trick-or-treating alone?" the man asked with a hint of concern. Feeling like I'd done something wrong, I said, "I have to go." Then I ran out into the street and hid behind a tree. Maybe I should just give up and go home. I took out one of the candies, unwrapped it, and took a bite. My mouth exploded with sweetness. I swallowed it and immediately ate the next piece. I could feel the blood rushing through my body. The sudden burst of energy dragged me to the next house. The lady smiled and complimented my beggar costume, then gave me 3 pieces of candy, which I devoured as soon as I was out of sight. The rest of the night was more of the same polite smiles and lots of candy. My scarf never even had a chance to fill up. An hour later, I was walking back out of town, much slower. My stomach started feeling weird and making noises I'd never heard before. I stopped by the trash can where I had thrown away the banana peel, and suddenly I threw up all the candy I'd eaten. The big man came out and watched me vomiting into the trash can. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, taking a deep breath. "Here," he said, handing me some paper towels. "Clean yourself up and follow me." He waited for me to finish, then started walking toward downtown. I followed him until we reached a building with a big star on the front. I hesitated. "Go in," the man said. "It's okay." The big man walked in with me close behind. "Good evening, Sheriff," said a man behind a tall counter. "Who's your friend?" "What's your name, kid?" the sheriff asked. Joe." "Joe what?" "Just Joe." "But what's your last name?" "I don't understand," I said. "My mama always called me Joe." "Okay, what's your mama's name?" "Mama," I said, confused. "Joe. Mama?" the man at the desk said. "Seriously?" The sheriff chuckled a little. "Okay, kid, let's get you cleaned up. Follow me." He led me down the back hallway where the cells were. I immediately got nervous. "Don't worry, kid. I'm just letting you take a shower and get some clean clothes." After I showered and changed, he brought me back, took my photo, and fingerprinted me. "Well, run these through the National Fugitive Database," he told the deputy. "Sure thing, boss." Nothing came back. "Joe, how long have you been living on the street?" the sheriff asked. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. "Where does your mother live?" Again, I stayed silent. "I think I know exactly what you need to loosen that tongue of yours. Come on." He left the station, and I followed him, carrying my old clothes. "How's your stomach?" he asked. "A little better," I said. "Good, because here we are." It was a large 2-story brick house. I could see under the streetlight that the house was well kept. When the woman answered the door, she looked familiar. "Hello, Sheriff," she said cheerfully. "Hi, Marcy. I've got someone for you to meet." "We've already met," she said, smiling. He was dressed like a vagrant. "Well, I'm not sure it was a costume. I think he's a runaway." She shook her head and made a sad whistling sound. "Come on in. I've got to get going if that's okay with you." "Of course, Sheriff," she said. "You know our door's always open." "Thanks, Marcy. I'll send the paperwork for Joe in the morning." "Sounds good, thanks." "Take care, kid," he told me. "You're in good hands here. He'll see you around." "Thank you, sir," I said. He laughed. "You can call me Ted." Then he nodded and left. Marcy showed me my room, apologizing for how small it was. She had no idea it was almost the same size as the shack where I lived with Mama. I laid down on the soft bed and fell asleep immediately. I woke up startled and panicked, alone in a huge room I didn't recognize, surrounded by comforts I'd never had at home. I jumped out of bed, put on my old clothes, and escaped through the bedroom window. I headed back to the tunnel with Dawn about an hour away, feeling guilty for leaving Mama in the first place. But Marcy had seemed so friendly, and the bed was so soft. When I got to the tunnel, my mind was in total war with itself about where to call home. Lost in thought, I wasn't paying attention to where I was going and had wandered into the tunnel. Instead of getting through it as fast as I could, I was kicking rocks and pondering life. Ray was the closest thing I had to a friend. He lived in a shack 2 hollows up from where I stayed. He was born with only one working arm, the other just wasn't there. A tiny finger grew out of his shoulder. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. Ray didn't talk either. He just had a stump of a tongue. I never knew if he was born that way or if he had said something really bad to his dad. I never knew how old Ray was. He was already an adult when I was still crawling around the shack, but he always had the mind of a child. Sometimes when I went dumpster diving, I'd bring Ray an old beat-up action figure that someone had thrown away. He loved playing with them, but the first thing he always did was rip off the right arm. I guess he thought it made them more like him. Ray loved trains. Every time I saw him, it was near the tracks. Tonight was no exception. The hum grew louder and louder. The very air seemed charged with electricity. The ground shook as I stood frozen with fear and indecision. The deafening blare of the horn snapped me into action. As I ran, the realization that I was about to die horribly washed over me. I stumbled blindly into the powerful light, helpless and lost. Suddenly, a hand grabbed me, yanked me back from the tracks and shoved me into the emergency cut as the train thundered past. The wind from the passing train made me shield my face. After the train had gone, I looked around to see who had saved me, but no one was there. I slowly stepped out of the cut and looked around. About 10 yards away, sitting between the tracks, was a colorful piece of plastic. I picked it up. It was a dirty action figure with one of its arms ripped off. Oh my God, Ray. I looked down and saw a small splash of blood. As I followed the tracks toward the tunnel entrance, it grew heavier. When I felt the fresh air, the tracks looked like the floor of a slaughterhouse. So that's how I ended up there, watching my friend's blood drip onto the cold steel tracks. The noblest, most selfless act I had ever witnessed, and I was the only one who knew about it. If that were the end of the story, most of you would just shake your heads sadly and move on. But the story was only beginning. I was at a crossroads in my young life. If I went home and told Mom what had happened, I'd lose a lot of blood myself for going through the tunnel and for lying to her. But if I simply left, Mom would come looking for me, and God knows what would happen if she found me. I ran to my cave, shoved all my important things into an old worn-out backpack, then ran back to the tunnel. I grabbed the basket full of fruit, threw them here and there, anywhere there was blood, then placed the basket right in the middle of the tracks and waited. I could barely see in the light as dawn started to fight against the darkness. "Joe," came my mom's voice. I froze. I didn't think she could see me. She was probably just calling out, hoping I was close enough to hear her. My resolve weakened every time she called my name. Finally, I saw two lights. One was Mom's old lantern, and the other was a train approaching. My heart leapt and stopped at the same time. The train roared closer, its horn nearly deafening me. It barreled into the tunnel, obliterating the basket. As soon as it passed, I darted across. The moment I got out, the lantern appeared at the other end. I slowly peeked around the corner and could just make out the silhouette of a woman on her knees between the tracks, holding something in her arms. Finally, I realized it was what remained of the basket. My heart almost gave out. I wanted to run back to her and tell her everything was okay. I took a step forward. Then I remembered Ray, not wanting his sacrifice to be in vain. I quickly turned my back to the tunnel and started walking toward town. 10 minutes later, I climbed back through my bedroom window, closed it behind me, and turned to see Marcy standing there with her arms crossed. "That's the first rule," she said firmly. "You never leave this house without asking first." "Sorry," I said, lowering my head. "Well, come on then. Let's have breakfast." "That's it? What were you expecting?" "A beating." "Who hit you?" Marcy asked, her eyes wet with compassion. "Mom," I said, shrugging. She pulled me into a tight hug and whispered, "I will never hit you." Then suddenly she let me go and headed downstairs, wiping her eyes. I followed her and ate the biggest breakfast I'd ever had. It didn't take long for me to start thinking I'd chosen the right house. The year was full of ups and downs. Marcy and her kids, Paul and Sharon, not only welcomed me into their home, but took me on as their personal project. I'd never even heard the phrase foster family before. Within 6 months, Id recovered from years of neglect and managed to enroll in school only 1 grade below my age. They rallied around me as their cause, and we became a real family like I'd never known before. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. The next Halloween, I went trick-or-treating again. Sharon had just turned 14 and decided she was too mature for trick-or-treating. Paul and I dressed as pirates and went out together, but we got separated in the crowd of costumes. While I was looking for him, I realized how close I was to the tunnel. Hesitant, I walked over and looked inside. To my surprise, I saw a silhouetted woman kneeling in the middle of the tracks, holding a basket and rocking back and forth. "Mom," I whispered. Somehow, the figure heard me. She looked up directly at me. Without knowing why, a sudden chill ran down my spine. The figure stood up and started walking slowly toward me. I felt drawn to her and began stepping into the tunnel. But instead of being filled with relief and love, I felt like I was suffocating. Suddenly, the figure vanished. Once again, my curiosity had overpowered my common sense. I strained my eyes to see where she had gone. I pulled out a small flashlight and shone it around the tunnel. My shadow looked larger. I pointed the light at it, but it didn't go away. The light simply disappeared into it, like an empty void from which not even light could escape. Then I realized it wasn't my shadow. It was Mom's. As I stared, the air grew heavy and hard to breathe. I felt a presence behind me and heard the word Joe, whispered in my ear. I panicked and froze. The dark figure drew closer. I felt like I was choking. A cold tendril touched my face, snapping me out of my stupor. I ran with everything I had. Before I knew it, I was back home. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, trembling. About time you got home. Paul and I were about to go looking for you, Marcy called from the kitchen. How was trick-or-treating? I had to focus just to steady my breathing. Good, I said, just to buy myself a few precious moments to recover. Well, I made a pumpkin pie, but I bet you already ate half your candy, she said. Yeah, I'm kinda tired. I think I'll go to bed. She smiled, that warm smile that always let me know everything would be okay. Good night, honey. A few hours later, I was having a wonderful dream, full of sugar, about diving into a pool of candy. When the dream turned dark, I felt so cold that I tried to snuggle into my blanket, but it didn't warm me up. I opened my eyes and saw the room completely dark. No light. I looked around to get my bearings and saw a shadow by the bed moving on its own. It reached out to me, but I recoiled. Joe, it whispered. Mom. I slowly reached out to her. It felt like liquid ice flowing over my hand. Home, she said, looking out the window toward the tunnel. I looked at where she was pointing. No, Mom. This is my home now. The shadow recoiled as Marcy stumbled into my room half asleep. What's wrong, sweetheart? Too much sugar? She stopped abruptly when she saw the shadow hovering over me. This is my new mom, I said. She treated me well, taught me to read, and never hit me. The shadow seemed to consider that. Joe? Marcy whispered to me, not taking her eyes off the shadow. I'll explain later, I whispered back. The shadow whispered, blood. Black tendrils shot into Marcy's ears. She screamed but was silenced as the shadow filled her mouth and eyes from the inside out, making her look like a living skull. I have no idea what kind of hell she was going through on the inside, but on the outside, her body convulsed violently. Blood splattered as she thrashed against the walls like she was looking for an escape she could never find. Stop it, Mom, I screamed, but I didn't dare move for fear of being struck down myself by Marcy. Finally, the tendrils withdrew from Marcy's ears, and she collapsed into a heap of blood. Paul and Sharon came into the room rubbing their eyes. What's all the noise? Sharon was cut off by the sight of the blood and their mom lying face down on the floor. Mom! She and Paul screamed, running toward her as the shadow reached them. No, Mom. I lunged at the shadow, trying to knock it down or stop it somehow. But my body went right through it. I felt as if my very soul had frozen. I collapsed on the floor on the other side, scattering most of my belongings. I watched in horror as the tendrils burrowed into their ears. The looks of terror and betrayal on their faces are something I've never forgotten, as the shadow turned them into bloody, struggling puppets. They collapsed on the floor of my destroyed room as I lost consciousness. I woke up to a strange combination of hot and cold. The shadow brushing against my cheek sent chills down my spine, while flames licked the walls of my room. I looked around and saw my space heater lying face down, still running. Its red-hot coils had set the carpet on fire, and the flames spread like the flu in an elementary school. The fire surrounded me. I glanced at the 3 mutilated bodies lying still. Panic took over, and I jumped out the window as the flames converged. I hit the grass, gulping the cool night air, then turned to watch the fire devour what was once my home and my family. Home. The shadow whispered in my ear. "No, Mom. You destroyed my home." "Home?" she hissed, as tendrils hovered beside my ears. "Go ahead. I'd rather die than go back with you." She hovered there as the melancholy wail of fire truck sirens sounded in the distance. I reached out to the shadow. "Let me live my life, Mom. When it's over, I promise I'll come home." The tendril wrapped around my hand as I fought the urge to pull away. Just when I thought I'd get frostbite, the shadow evaporated. I passed out in the damp grass, staring at the flames rising high into the night sky. The smell of burning plastic and wood made me feel as though my own flesh were being stripped from my bones, leaving me dead inside. The melancholy wail ended as the firefighters arrived, bathing the neighborhood in flashing red lights. One of them guided me away from the house, sat me on the curb, and draped a blanket over my shoulders. Slowly, they got the fire under control. The furious orange flames were extinguished, just like my hopes and dreams of a normal life. I watched as 3 stretchers, each carrying a body, were wheeled out from what was left of the house. Each one bypassed the ambulance and went straight to the coroner's van. I sat silently, staring at the ground. "Joe?" Ted said. My eyes didn't move. I didn't even blink. Questions flew from every direction: the EMT, the sheriff, the judge, the jury. But I didn't dare tell any of them the truth. After the trial, Ted took me to my new home. We stopped in front of a huge brick building surrounded by fences topped with barbed wire. The sign out front read, "Larson Mental Institute." The gate opened and he drove in. After parking, he leaned forward against the steering wheel for a moment, then let out a long sigh. "Look, kid. If you get better, I'll bring you back. I promise." 4 orderlies came out and took me inside. I wish I could say my time at the institute was helpful and productive. I wish I could say I learned a lot and came out a better person. I wish I could say Ted kept his word and came to get me when my time was up. But as a wise man once said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I wrote more journals about the other things that happened to me in my life, but there's still a little more to tell in this story. 50 years later. "Grandpa, did that story really happen?" Emily asked, looking at my face. "Of course it did," I said. "Are you calling your grandpa a liar?" "No, sir," she said. "But what happened to that boy?" "He got better, grew up, got married, and had a wonderful family," I said, smiling. "Okay, honey," said Joe Jr. "It's getting late. We better go." Emily hugged me and climbed off my lap. "Look at me, Grandpa. I'm a princess," she said, spinning in a circle. "And a beautiful princess too," I said. "I hope you get lots of candy this year. Here's some to get you started." Then I put a handful of candy into the little plastic pumpkin she was carrying. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek, then ran to the car. "Well, we're off," said Joe Jr. "Lots of trick-or-treating to do. I can't believe she's already in 2nd grade." "Where does the time go?" said Joe Jr., checking his watch. "Where indeed?" I said, looking at Joe Jr. "You sure you won't come live with us? Mom's been gone over a year now. You know I can't do that." I made a promise. "Please, Dad, not this again," said Joe Jr., putting his face in his hands. "I thought they cured you of this at the institute. Aren't you taking your meds?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Son, they can't cure my problem with meds." I pulled out a pocket knife and started whittling. Joe Jr. just lowered his head in resignation. "Okay. Love you, Dad. Love you too, son." Emily waved as they drove their new SUV down the dirt road that crossed the tracks and began the long, winding drive toward town. I watched them go as I whittled absent-mindedly. The red, orange, and yellow leaves had given way to dull browns. Soon winter would show its ugly face. I smiled as I looked at the empty wood pile with complete indifference. My jaw tightened as the air around me grew heavy. A shadow appeared in the chair beside me. I kept whittling, trying my best to act like its presence didn't bother me. The shadow reached out and gently placed a hand on mine. "Home," it whispered. "Yes, Mom. Home." I smiled, ignoring the chills running up my arm. I placed the piece of wood had been carving a small locomotive down, grabbed my pipe, filled it with tobacco, and lit it. I took a long puff and watched the match continue to burn. The flame seemed to hypnotize me, as if I were looking at a microcosm of my whole life in that tiny glowing chemical reaction. I almost never smoked, but today was different. Today was special. When the flame burned down to my fingers, I dropped the match onto the pile of wood shavings, then stood up and went inside. The recommended dose for my sleeping pills was 2, as needed. I took 2 dozen and washed them down with a glass of water. As I write these last words I'll ever write, I just want to say a few goodbyes. To Ray, thank you for sacrificing your life to save mine. To Ted, thank you for giving me a new one. And to Mom, burn in hell. Just like me. I lay down on the old worn bed and looked around the cabin one last time. Good night, Mom, I whispered to the shadow. The shadow caressed my face, making me shiver. I left my notebook, placed it in a bucket, and covered it with a blanket. The firefighters worked through the night to get the blaze under control before it became a full-blown forest fire. Once it was extinguished, they investigated the cause. They found the remains of the cabin and the remains of Joe. The fire had started on the front porch, next to what was left of a wooden chair. There wasn't much left to identify except for a notebook that had been protected inside a bucket. The very notebook I'm reading this story from. While searching, they also found 2 graves. One had been freshly dug and was empty. The markings were badly burned but still legible. The first read Mom, and the second Joe, followed by a small inscription. Death, where is your sting?